But just to prepare, I got my favorite afternoon beverage, which is, has anyone ever been to the Good Earth restaurants? Yes, Lena has. So, because I think they're from California, but I don't know if they ever moved to other states.
I
And
was thinking of that one that was in, where we had the last, not this, the last project directors.
oh, I don't know.
Maybe it
So
wasn't that.
yeah, I mean, they haven't been around for a while, I should say. But California had a lot of good health food restaurants back in the 80s and probably the 70s. And this was one of them. And they're not around anymore to my knowledge, but their tea is still available in some stores and of course on Amazon. This Good Earth tea. And it's just it's decaf when I get, it's like just the perfect flavor. So I was just curious if anyone has a favorite afternoon drink that they appreciate while they're working.
Okay.
I'm
So
happy.
this is Tom Manthe,
Yes.
and I love Fresca.
It is so good.
It's still sold. You have to know where it is, but boy, is it refreshing.
It really is, as the name would imply. Yeah, that was my husband's favorite drink when we first met. Love it. Orange and cinnamon tea, which is basically what I'm drinking too. Yeah, I can't have caffeine or else I will never go to sleep again. Single spice. I'm always so jealous because that at Starbucks they try to give you the 50% off afternoon drink thing, and it's like I can't get anything exciting. So all right. Well, thanks folks for sharing that. We definitely have some coffee drinkers. I can drink coffee until like 10 a.m. safely. All right. I'm very glad to see you all. I think it's going to be a good, this tends to be mainly a presentation. But that said, please do stop me as I go. If we needed to have a part 2 because we didn't get through everything, that's fine too, right? And we record everything and we make it available later. So I really want this to meet your needs. You have me today, and then you have your project officer to talk to after this. So it's, doesn't all have to happen today. But that said, if you have a question, I bet someone else has a question that matches yours. All right. So why are we here? I want to provide the GEPA results from last year's APRs. I've done this at least partially at a few different places at a few different times, but you're going to get it all together in one in a little more depth today. I want to remind folks, even if you've been at previous APR webinars or heard about this, just some of the things that overall projects are doing really well and some of the areas of challenge that you might want to focus on in terms of the detail you provide. I also want to prepare you with the deadlines and give you the guidance you need for your annual performance report, APR, and talk about the times that we gather that can help with some of the APR reporting. And specifically, we have Fidelity Fridays, which we will start getting going again now that we've had our big events and have a little bit more time. Right. And Kelsey, if you wouldn't mind letting me know if there's anything in the chat I need to be aware of going forward, I would appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Thank you. And so learning targets, there are many things I hope you get out of this, but just a couple are that you'd be able to talk about the fidelity measure that is required for program measure 2, understand what that means specifically. And then also that where to get resources like the exemplars of others' APRs. And so my intention for our time together, putting a lot in your brain, but hopefully that means that when it comes time to put together your APR, you have the resources and know how to meet the expectations we have for program measures and your project measures, etc. All right, so here's the APR calendar, and note it says not for new grantees. So this is all basically true, and new grantees have something additional that I'll show you on the next slide. So you've received your continuation package. You may have noted it was earlier this year than it's been in the previous couple years. Got it in January instead of February. Luckily, it just adds time on because the due date is still the first week of May. So now we're having our how-to webinar. We always have it within a couple weeks of receiving those directions. And then your draft program measures are due to your project officer by April 15th. And when I say draft program measures, I personally, you and your project officer may have a different agreement, but what I want is the status charts with your program measures in there. I don't necessarily need the description. I don't need your evidence-based professional development worksheet. It's just a matter of ensuring that the information that our contractor who looks at the program measures needs is there. So that'll be ready once we get the whole package to hand off to the contractor, and I won't have to do, and your project officer won't have to do a second review to make sure, does it say program? Does it have all the information, etc. So it's just the program measures and your status chart that you'd be sending. We don't need to see your project measures if you're an existing grantee. If you're new, if this is your first year of the project, then that means that you have to create all your draft measures. Again, not the descriptions of them that goes in the explanation of progress section, but we need your project measures and your program measures aligned with your objectives so that we can give you feedback. The first year of a project is very iterative to get there. You have included project and program measures most likely in your application, but you're further shaping them, right? You've learned some new things since you originally applied, which is typically months before that. Your partners have come on board, you have an evaluator now, you're planning, and your project officer is going to have some really good feedback for you. So work with your project officer to determine the timing of needing those draft measures. The rest of the dates still apply, but you're giving your overall measures, and you may not want to wait until April to do that because, you know, it's many more measures that you're looking at with the help of your project officer. And it might take you time to go back to your team and talk with your evaluator. So I'm going to stop there. Any questions about the timelines for a new project versus an ongoing project? Okay, great. So this is the GEPRA review progression, and I use GEPRA. So the GEPRA GPRA is the Government Performance Results Act. That is government-wide. It's been around, I believe, since Clinton was president. And it is our way of giving data to Congress about how our programs are doing. And it goes, for us, it goes through our budget office. I don't know if that's true for every agency. And so we call the GEPRA measures at your level, at the project level, we call them program measures. But if you put GEPRA or program into the little part of the status chart that asks for the kind of measure, we'll take either. But typically you're going to, program is typically what people use. So what we do is we take each project's program measures, we aggregate them, and then we give those data via our contractor to Congress to take a look at each year. So if you were in implementation year one, you're really just putting together baselines, targets, information. So you're going to give us your data, but the contractor is not going to look at it. In year two of implementation of your project, so your project's actually been working with PD participants for 2 years at that point in time, professional development participants. Year two, when you turn in your APR, that's when the contractor will look at your evidence-based professional development worksheet for program measure 1, which we'll get into the program measures, but this is just giving you an overview of what happens when. And then in implementation years 3 and 4, the contractor will review your worksheet for program measure 1. They'll review your fidelity measure for program measure 2, your cost measure for program measure 3. So all 3 of those. And then in implementation year 5, they'll do all of that and they'll review program measure 4. They're looking for program measure 4 throughout the life of your grant because we're collecting information about it right now, but not to report to Congress, just to kind of, since it's a new measure, just to get a sense of what people are giving, or including in the status chart. So any questions about how we work with the contractor or the years that they capture those data? Okay, great. There we go. So program measure 1, this is our evidence-based professional development measure. And I've got the theory, the simplified theory of action later on, but the big idea is that if you have a good professional development system, then that's going to lead to educators, adults, being able to use the skills you think are important for them to then improve results for children with disabilities. So we got to start with that evidence-based professional development. And when we say evidence-based professional development, we've laid out, these are things that need to happen if adults are going to learn new skills. All right, so going back all the way to 2012, you can look at the data over time, but for us, the important number today is that our target for program measure 1 was 82% of projects meeting the target that we set out. In this instance, we set the target out. And the actual was 88% of projects met that target, right? So they're in implementation year 2 or further. So we exceeded that target. Take a second so people can look at all the data. And just so you know, for those of you who are newer to the SPDIG and SIG network, we really didn't take off with the data until 2016. That's when things were truly in place. All right, so this is the implementation year the initiative was in. And, I've been talking about project, but if a project has 2 initiatives, they report on both. And then the contractor chooses one of those initiatives to draw the data from for the GEPRA measures. They choose randomly. So initiatives in implementation year 2, there were 8. Year 3, there were 2. Year 4, there was 1. Year 5, 3. Year 6, 6. And year 7, 5. And this was the number of them who met their target. This is the number that didn't. You can see that's how we came up with the 88%. This is the Excel taken from the Excel spreadsheet that the contractors give me. And the top section, so you can see these are the different components of the evidence-based professional development rubric / worksheet that you respond to. So there's the selection domain, training, coaching, performance assessment, and then administrative support, systems intervention section. And then the gray section just adds up the number of initiatives that had the components. In this case, I'm looking at A1 here. The number of initiatives that had A1 rated by the contractor as a 1 in terms of, it's either just not enough detail, missing something, not meeting the requirements, basically for 1. And then for 2, for receiving a score of 2, also 1 initiative. Receiving a score of 3, 19 initiatives, and score of 4, 4 initiatives. So, and then below it, it becomes the initiative year. So if you look across selection, training, coaching, performance assessment, administrative support, obviously we did well. We met our target. But what I did was I took these numbers and I made decision points of, if we're looking at those that scored 1 or 2 versus those that scored 3 or 4. Which one were the ones that were, oh, we're doing really well in this, and which are the ones that, you know, we have some room for growth. And so I looked at where we had more showing up. And these are areas of strength. So, you know, expectations for professional development participants, expectations for trainers and coaches, accountability for the delivery and quality of training, research-based adult learning strategies. Training is skill-based, which is great. That hasn't always been one of our areas of strength across projects. So that's really good. Trainers are trained, coached, and observed. Accountability for the development, evaluation, quality, and timeliness of coaching services. Coaching outcome data collected and analyzed, which is also great. And even technical and adaptive leadership at the state level, which is a tough one. So this is great. These are all areas of strength that we, oh, and sorry, E2 doesn't show up in this, but also leadership to build state level capacity and sustainability. And if you've been around for a little while with this SPDIG, you know, E2 has always been one of our hardest ones. So that's really a big move in the right direction. That's tough. That state level changing, leveraging systems work is really tough. So congratulations. And what to watch. So these are areas that, you know, some projects did great in them, others didn't score quite as well. So just some things to be aware of. That B5, and this is how you are training and coaching administrators about your initiative, right? What are the skills they should be seeing in the teachers they support or the interventionists they support? How can they develop and support implementation teams that then support the folks implementing? How to support coaches that may be coming into the building or working virtually with their people. And it's about the expectations that you share with administrators, again, how they're trained and coached, and how do you support them in supporting implementation teams. And I know states are doing this very, very well. And if you need an example from someone else, if you want to be connected to, you know, a mentor, so to speak, in this specific area, please let me know. And C2, coaches use effective coaching practices to increase innovation fidelity, you know, also known as implementation fidelity. And this is about the coaching process, including coaching strategies, frequency, how feedback is provided, use of data within the coaching process, how coaching effectiveness is measured. So we had a speaker, Jennifer Pierce, at the SPDIG national meeting who talked about the coaching practices and measuring how things are going. And we can look back on that if that would be helpful. I think that there's a lot of good coaching work. And we also had some doc students take a look and bring out some models. And so we can share those data again. So I know our next director's webinar, we have a plan already, an exciting plan, but perhaps one of the webinars after that, we can look back at the coaching practices. And then 2 more components to watch, D2 and D3. And so this is, D2 is coherent data systems being in place at all education levels. And this is really connecting, you know, you have fidelity data, are you connecting it to the outcomes? Have you set targets and benchmarks? Do you have data collection guidance that are going out to folks? And are you training and coaching teams on using the data so that they can continue to improve? And fidelity and student outcome data used to inform continuous improvement. You know, there's some overlap on these, right? But how are they communicated in usable formats? You know, we talked about infographics, talked about data dashboards. South Dakota is going to talk about both in the director's webinar for February. So stay tuned for that. Feedback loops. How does each level of the education system talk to each other and share data? And how are you making changes as a result of the fidelity and child outcome data? And then also B5, this is an area we were talking about administrators trying to coach. that I have some feedback from CIP, the Center to Improve Project Performance. That's our contractor that looks at your program measure data from your APR. And just a couple of initiatives that they had, notes in the Excel spreadsheet. Thought it would be helpful for us to look at. If you describe activities that occurred in prior years, not the current reporting year, then they can't count that. It's got to be something that has happened in that year you're actually reporting on. In this instance, they needed a description of how the trainers are trained, how the trainers are coached, and then if there was a training fidelity instrument, they just weren't sure about that. And then expectations for administrators, description of how administrators were supported was insufficient, and description of supports for creating implementation teams was missing. So those are the kinds of notes they give an explanation of why something scored a 1 or a 2. So program measure 1, just a reminder, there is a revised worksheet and rubric. If you received your grant in fiscal year 2020, if you started your grant in 2020 or 2021, 2022, and now 2023. So when you're completing your evidence-based professional development worksheet, there are exemplar worksheets that are part of APRs, and I've linked it here, and you have access to these slides on the APR and program measures webpage. Use the appropriate worksheet. Again, 2015 to 2017 grantees have a worksheet. 2020 and on have a different worksheet. And those are both linked. And then I always recommend, if you have someone willing to read your information who is not part of the SPDIG, I recommend you do that. They could tell you if they thought there's some detail missing, or if there's some information that was unnecessary to respond to the requirements. And you can also contact me, and I will connect you with another state if you'd like to trade and take a look at each other's. So any questions about program measure 1, evidence-based professional development? All right, so program measure 2 is about improving implementation. And the big description is the percentage of special education, SPDIGs initiatives that meet benchmarks for improvement in implementation of SPDIG supported practices over time. So here are our data. Again, you really start from 2016. I need to start cutting off the old data. But 2023, our target was 60% of the initiatives meeting the target that they set for improving implementation. And the actual was almost 71% meeting the target. So we exceeded our target, which is the first time for a while. Last time we exceeded our target was 2017. So we are celebrating you. You worked hard. We had a fidelity work group that was planning behind the scenes. I know you engaged in lots of conversations with each other. You shared. Everyone was very generous, and we'll continue to work on that. There are lots of research grants that don't ever reach fidelity. So I think it's not easy work. Here were the initiative years and whether or not they reached their target, in case that's of interest to you. And then just some things, just reminders, we did well, but be clear about the fidelity measure that you used. That's something the contractors need in order to say, yes, they met their target, they count. Got to tell them the fidelity measure you used. If the fidelity measure is a self-assessment, so perhaps, someone is saying, yes, I met this benchmark. They're the ones who are deciding about themselves. You need an external observation reliability check. This could be from a coach, could be a team from another school, perhaps. You can do that in lots of ways. It just can't be, that extra 20% can't be a self-judgment. And then thinking about your targets, when you first start a project, your SPDIG project, you're thinking across the years, like So I'll be providing this much training and coaching. This is where I would expect these schools to be, this cohort of schools to be meeting their fidelity targets. You know, you're setting out a map for yourself. And then as you report in your APR, you're thinking, okay, does next year's target still make sense considering what I'm seeing now? Do I need to make it, you know, do I need to stretch more that way? Do I need to bring it back a little bit more this way? And then you discuss that with your project officer. Any questions about these considerations for fidelity program measure 2? All right. So this is, you know, it's really, it can be challenging if you are implementing multi-tiered systems of support, you know, in academics or behavior. It can be difficult because there are lots of measures of fidelity that are necessary to know that things are being done well, right? We think all of those measures of fidelity are important. We OSEP, we SPDIG, but the program measure for fidelity needs to be something that is actually reaching the child, something that you think is going to improve the child outcomes that you're focused on for program measure 4. So in this instance, MTSS is supporting literacy, and the letters program is what's being used. I don't know, you call letters and intervention, but is being used to teach reading. And so you would actually capture the fidelity of the letters intervention and then connect that with the child outcome of reading, reading skills. So any questions about this idea that if your grant started in 2020 or 2021, 22, 23, that this is the kind of fidelity we're looking at, not more that system fidelity that has been common in the past? All right, so this is just kind of a summary of requirements and strategies. So we talked about intervention fidelity, and then also the strategies for data collection. I know if it's a tough data collection and you just feel like you don't have the resources to do it, some considerations are to sample. Again, you talk to your project officer about this. Determining, you know, if different schools or sites are choosing different activities that they're supporting, say within MTSS, then you might think about if there are essential features across the different interventions, or you could look at it as, you know, you have maybe different fidelity measures in each site, but it's whether they're meeting their benchmarks on that fidelity measure. And I can work with your project officer on how you state that in your APR. So any questions about that or other strategies that you can think of that might be helpful for folks who are having difficulty with this new-ish requirement for fidelity?
I have a question. I'm curious about when you say connect that with the student outcomes. What would be, so in our site in Minnesota, we work with 5 or 6 school districts. Is connecting to student outcomes, so is that the unit of the school or the unit of the individual students? Are you thinking like, you know, 5 schools, you know, like you know, maybe like that 20% meeting that fidelity measure in terms of connecting it to the student outcomes? Do you
I think
say like
oh.
majority meeting or rather than individual students?
Yeah, so I would think, I can't picture your APR in my head right now since I'm your project officer, so keeping that in mind, but Check and Connect is the intervention. It's a targeted strategy, so not everyone in the school is receiving it. So I would think you would have individual student outcomes, right? They're receiving the Check and Connect mentoring supports, and they're, you know, their graduation rate is, they're headed toward graduation, or their attendance rate is improving, is another way you could see it. I understand once you're looking at graduation rate, it's not necessarily happening that year. So then you're looking at the overall. So, I think it's probably a longer discussion than that, but in a perfect world, I know graduation is the big idea of what you're aiming for, but the child outcome would be a little bit closer to the targeted intervention and would probably be attendance or engagement on task kind of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Great, really good question. Thanks, Edith. All right, another program measure 2 example. So this is about PBIS. And, I don't think I've seen a project use functional behavior assessment as a way to look at it. But it's come up a number of times with PBIS that school, if you're looking at the school-wide effort, it does reach the child in some ways. So I could kind of see the argument for having a measure of that as the fidelity. I don't know. I think it's something that we have to wrestle with kind of on a project by project basis, most likely, unless someone has a good way of thinking about PBIS as we typically see it carried out, and fidelity that improves outcomes for children with disabilities. All right, well, we'll continue to have the conversations, put it that way. Setting targets, again, the big idea is make them challenging but achievable. Analyze your history and your plans for professional development. Set the target for the out years, knowing that they can be changed as you go forward. Not right before you turn in your data for your APR. It's good practice to change your target a year before you're actually providing the data. But know that we are flexible about the targets. When you set them for the 5 years of your project, we're flexible that they change for that next year when you have entered your data into your APR for the current year. Right, reliability checks. We talked about this a bit, so I'm not going to get into it too much. And then these are some of the ideas that have come up about fidelity. We need to plan another Fidelity Friday. And so I wanted to get people thinking. People have talked about goal attainment, scaling, procedural checklists, statewide data systems. What are the essentials? What do you target? Monitoring fidelity efficiently. Maybe there needs to be a toolkit for SIG network about fidelity. So be thinking about Fidelity Fridays and what you'd like to hear, because I'm going to have a question for you. So a deeper dive into fidelity questions that have come up. What do you target implementation at the student level, professional development, team, or state level? And how do you prioritize if you cannot do it all? So the question here is about, we want to know fidelity of everything, right? Like we're providing these supports at the state level. Are we doing it like we said we would? We're providing supports at the regional level. Are folks doing it like they said they would? At the district level, at the school level, at the classroom level? And they're saying, we can't do it all. How do we prioritize? So for GEPRA, for the program measures, it's going to be at the student level, right? Or the child level. We need to know what's happening there. And maybe there are, the word I'm looking for, concrete things that are already available that show you if things are being done with fidelity. Like maybe there is an agenda at the regional level for the implementation team meeting that you could use to say, okay, they're following the procedures that we hope they would. Same goes for the state level. So think about what already exists, and if you could use that to tell you if things are being done with fidelity is an idea. Then like I said, we've had the idea of having a toolkit about fidelity, how to collect and report it. I haven't had the time to create that myself, nor would I have all the pieces that you all have. And so the idea is that, you know, if people are really interested in it, could a group meet together to put a fidelity toolkit in place that others could use? And if you're interested, you can put your name in the chat or email me. So Fidelity Fridays, as I promised, here's the question. So what should the next topic be? We've surveyed you before, you had lots of ideas. We tried to respond to those ideas with previous directors webinars, the program area meeting at the project directors conference, the SPDIG national meeting. We've had some previous Fidelity Fridays. So what do you still want to talk about that we haven't covered yet, or we just haven't covered with enough depth yet? Go ahead and give you a couple minutes to pop it in the chat. All right, so questions about program measure 2. What's clear as mud? Hearing none. So program measure 2 is the cost measure. Every grant program across all agencies in the US government has to have a cost measure. So we tried to make something that made a little bit of sense, and specifically using funds in a way that improves implementation and sustains implementation of your initiative. So here are the data. So this year, the target was 85%, meeting their own target that they set for cost. Only 84% did. So the target wasn't met. We were very close. I'm not real concerned about this number personally. This is the year of the initiative reported and whether or not they met their own target that they created for this measure. Oops, sorry. And then program measure 4 is about the percentage of SPDIG initiatives that meet their child outcome targets. This is a long-term measure, so at the end of your grant, year 5 and beyond is when the contractor will analyze your data and report it to Congress. So you've got to figure out the child outcome. Again, this is the kind of professional development you're providing so that adults will use these skills, so that children with disabilities, their outcomes will improve in this way. So you're going to set your initial targets for each year of your project. And then once you collect the data for that year, you're going to determine if the out years still seem reasonable. And the contractor is going to collect your information each year, although they're not reporting it to Congress till the end. So any questions, ideas about program measure 4? All right. So again, back to our theory of action. If you set up a good professional development system, you can increase the intervention implementation, you can improve child outcomes, and hopefully that comes out in those measures. So there, we do have some resources that should be helpful. They're linked to your slides that are on the APR webpage now. There is rubric B, which states exactly what you need to have in your APR related to the program measures. There's also an APR fillable form. It's more for our side of things, but we provide it to you in case it's helpful. Rubric B, just so you know, is what the contractor uses when they're reviewing things to make sure everything is there that's needed. You can see the program measure page is also linked there for ease. All right, so again, volunteers needed. Folks have asked for a Fidelity toolkit, but I would need help in putting that together. And so if you're willing to help out, please put your name in the chat. And then reminder to submit your program measures to your project officer by April 15th for review. You don't have to give them your project measures unless you are in the first year of your grant. Large available balances. If you have, once you turn in your APR, if you have more than 70% of that year's budget still left in G5, then you would have a large available balance. You'll receive an email. You'll have to then fill out that financial form. And you should always provide a strong description if you have a large available balance in section B of why you haven't been able to spend down your funds and your plans to catch up in your spending going forward. Because we use that to say, hey, they should have their full continuation amount. We look in section B. Questions about large available balances?
Jennifer, do you know around when or by when that email will be sent out to let us know?
It is probably, I mean, we have a new group in the front office, and that, you noticed that you got the letter earlier this year, so it could happen at a different time. Typically, it's been right around when you turn your APR in, if not a month after it. But I don't know if that's typical. That was last year. So maybe before that, it was a different time. But yeah, I haven't received the timing of that yet. Once I find out, though, I can certainly pass that on.
Okay, so the email letting us know that we do have to complete the 424 may get sent out after the APR deadline. So we would just.
It did last year. So then you wouldn't be able to attach it to your APR. But if it comes out earlier this year, then you'd know. And yeah, but
Okay.
I'm kind of going. Currently, my answer is based on what happened last year.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. So this is the end of the section. If you are a seasoned grantee, you probably don't need to listen to the next part. You're probably done at this point. I just want to give you a heads up that I'm going to go into basic APR information at this point. So grantee reporting requirements. We have annual performance reports and final performance reports. APRs is what we've been talking about. Your final performance report, once you have spent all the money you need to spend, then you send in your final performance report. It is due within 90 days after the last day of your grant. And you submit in G5. It's pretty much like the APR. There's a few places where you talk about lessons learned. You're just really finishing out, giving us your data and a description of everything you accomplished. No, the switch to G6 is on hold at this moment. And so I don't believe there's any guidance at this point. Yeah, I don't know exactly what happened and why it was paused, but it's not entirely surprised either. Yeah, no problem. All right, so here is the beautiful cover sheet. Most of you will be providing in your performance report, so that's there at the top. And the reporting period is the beginning, if you're in the first year of the grant, from the day you started through February 28th, years 2 through 5, March 1st. And actually, I need to make sure this matches up with Dear Colleague letter. It's the basic idea. basically March 1st through February 28th. As I always say, it's not a big deal what that it is, just should be, you know, within that range. You are not providing your final complete data. So you say no over here where that arrow says no. And then the final day of your project is, or sorry, the final performance report. So 90 days after the final day of your project, that's when you'll have the full data that goes there. And then the project director is not the authorized representative. That is, it can be different people depending on your agency. It can be the special ed director, it can be the head of the financial or grants office. You know, so if you're confused about who the authorized rep is, please talk to your project officer, but just know it's not the same person as the project director. You have to have separation of responsibilities. Right, the executive summary sheet. This is not the project abstract. I don't think the SPDIGs don't have that issue so much. You're just talking about what's happened in the last year, your big highlights, you know, that you really want to stick out to someone reading it. Project status chart that I was talking about this earlier. The project objective goes up here at the top, and then the measures that have something to do with that objective are under it. You can mix up the program and the project. If you wanted to have all the program measures in one section, some people do that. It's fine. It doesn't really matter to me personally. The measure type, we were talking about saying program, and that is where it goes right there. And it's really, really important. That's why we take a look at it April 15th. The contractor does not know what to look at unless you've said program for your program measures. So, and then if it's not a program measure, it's a project measure. All right. So I just talked about aligning it, talking about measure type, but got ahead of myself. Oops, these are a little bit off, but you know what I mean? They would go a little bit to the left. It looked okay when I looked at it earlier. And then you either do a raw number or a ratio and a percentage. So it depends on the measure, what makes the most sense, right? So are you trying to improve the skills of 80% of the teachers that come? And so, you know, so 8 out of 10, say, teachers and 80%, or are you trying to improve the skills of, you know, I don't know, I'm not going to go, anyways, sometimes it makes sense to have a raw number. Sometimes it makes sense to have a percentage, but you do either the raw number or the ratio and the percentage. All right, explanation of progress section. I feel like often people don't read the directions about how you describe the explanation of progress, which is, see if there's a picture of this. See at that little, the bottom part underneath the status chart where it says explanation of progress. That's what I'm talking about. And there are directions for it. So what changes in the data occurred since the last APR? Have there been any trends in the data? What activities were undertaken to achieve the targets? If the targets were not met, what are possible reasons? How will activities that fail to meet the targets be improved? So all these directions are in the directions that are linked to your letter that you got about the APR, and it says explanation of progress. Here are the things to answer. And then the final page of the report is section B and section C. Section B and C both have instructions as well. You know, all the sections have instructions, but section B has specific questions. Section C has specific things that you'll be responding to. So your section B, these are all the directions. So, you know, the expenditures, explanation if you did not use your funds at the expected rate, any significant changes to your budget, and, you know, what modifications in your project activities led to that, anything that affected your ability to achieve your activities, your objectives. And then did you have unexpended funds? What, you know, how much do you think you're going to end up carrying over once the next budget period starts? And then how are you going to change your budget to use those funds? And then any other anticipated changes in your budget going forward. Again, all of these are directions that are available for you. And then section C is about current partners to your grant, like your required partners of university, a OSEP funded parent program, parent training and information center, or community parent resource center, or both. And at least one district LEA. Any changes to the partners, anything that, it's going to affect objectives activities, and any changes you wish to make in the grants activities that are consistent with your application. And you would let your project officer know outside of the APR. It's just a way of memorializing it in this document. Submitting in G5/G6, we're kind of, it's got a G6. When you first start, it's G6 and then it goes into G5. I don't even know what to call it at this point, G5.5. And then final performance report, there's some sections that give you extra directions. If you're in final performance report, it's not allowed. And reporting requirements during a no cost extension period. The big idea is that you should have an APR on record every 12 months. And we give a little leeway if you're in the final period of your project and you're going to give us the report by September, then that May APR isn't necessary, but almost never do people have their report actually ready in September. So I recommend, if you're going to no cost extension, providing the May APR, and then you'll do the final report after that. Project officer is always there for questions. High quality measures. Many of us wrote IEPs at one time in our the history of our history in education. And it's really a lot like that. You got to think about the description that it should have who the population is you're working with, how you're measuring it, what percentage of that population or what group of that population, the target you expect them to reach, how they're actually doing, all those things. You'll work with your project officer on that in the first year of your grant, and hopefully get all that squared away. But if you have new measures, you can again work with your project officer and make sure that the measure meets the requirements. So measurable indicators talk about the progress that will be assessed, what will constitute success, how will you know it's been reached. Talked about the program measures a lot today. So project measures can be process and outcome, but we want more, not as much process, like not how many meetings someone held or how many documents were created, things like that. That can be part of your overall plan for your project, but don't necessarily have to go into your APR. So again, this is the high quality measures, what will change, how much change you expect, who will achieve the change, when the change take place, how do you know the change, the kind of measure you're using. We talked about activities. These are examples of the activities, like had an advisory board meeting, established a program, we evaluated. So you don't want too many objectives, too many measures, but they should be something that really tell the story of what you're trying to measure and show how it's leading you to success. And that is it. Any questions folks have?
Yeah, I have a question, Jennifer. Just to clarify, for program measures, for program measure 4, that is only needed if it's in year 5.
No, you're going to give it every year in your APR. The contractor will report to Congress about it when you're in year 5 and beyond. So your project officer will always be looking at it.
Okay.
But the contractor won't use it for the GEPRA purposes until the end of your grant.
Okay. Thank you.
Good clarification. Thank you. All right, well, I'll hang here if anyone still has questions, but if you don't, feel free to enjoy 6 minutes between meetings. And thanks for everyone who added things to the chat and asked questions. It is really helpful to everyone. And thank you, Kelsey, for organizing.